This is what bad software would look like if you could see it. This is Homer's car, by the way, that he designed. When he wanted everything he wanted, this is what it came out to be. So the first version of a piece of software is generally pretty good. It's pretty clean, pretty easy, it's pretty focused. But software becomes pretty tricky once you get a few versions in. Version 2 is generally pretty good as well. Version 3 is a lot better. 4 and 5 might be the best possible version of the software you'll ever write. That might be the glory time for software. But after that, software quickly devolves and turns into something like this. This is what happens when you say yes to too many features. This is what happens when you say yes to all your customers. You end up eventually looking like this. So you have to work on avoiding that. And a great way to think about this, again, as I mentioned, is thinking about your product as if it was a physical device. But you also want to think about the responsibility you have, the discipline that you have to keep your product simple, clean, elegant, and streamlined. So you want to think about being sort of the shepherd, sort of the gatekeeper. You want to think of yourself as an editor, as someone who decides what comes in, what goes out. You ultimately want to think of yourself as a curator. There goes, we're missing an image. Anyway, a curator. It says you are a curator on the screen. Just imagine that. You want to be a curator. You have to decide what comes in, what goes out. A curator's job is to say no. That's what a curator does. They say no. And a curator basically takes the entire universe of options, and they decide whether or not these things are going to make it into the museum. And if you think about that, and you think about yourself as a curator, you can start to think about hanging your features on the wall, essentially. If you think about your product as a museum, you can think about the features as art, and you're in charge. And if you take all the possible features that exist out there in the world, or all the possible art, for example, you take all the possible art and you put it into a room, it doesn't make that room a museum. What makes that room a museum is that there's a lot of stuff that's not on the walls. All the art in the world in a single room is not a museum, it's a warehouse. It's not a museum. And you don't want your product to end up feeling like a warehouse, how it's just kind of everything to everybody. You have to be very, very careful about that.
What I want to talk about today is kind of a different way of marketing your company. And it was sort of touched on a little bit earlier with the idea of personal branding, but this kind of takes it to a different level. And I realized that the products I purchased weren't necessarily by these big brands, but they were products attached to someone who's taught me something. So I realized that I bought a Mario Batali Italian food cookbook, and I've been watching Mario Batali's show on the Food Network. I bought a Emeril Lagasse pot. I've been watching his show, and I bought Rick Bayless's Mexican Everyday or Everyday Mexican something cookbook, and I've been watching his show on PBS, and this other book by a guy named Steven Reichland, who's a barbecue guy. I've been watching his show on PBS, and I realized that all the stuff I bought because someone taught me something. I didn't see any ads for these products. I didn't see an ad on TV. I didn't see an ad in newspapers or in magazines. I don't remember hearing a radio spot for these products. I simply remember them because someone taught me something, and I realized how valuable that actually was. That when someone teaches you something, you have a different level of respect for them, and you kind of trust them at a different point, a different level than if someone was pitching you something. And so I started thinking to myself, that's this idea of sharing and teaching is a really effective way to get the word out about a product or a service or a business. And I wondered to myself why more companies aren't following the lead of these chefs who are out there teaching. And in fact, instead of trying to outspend the competition, they're trying to outteach the competition. Let's say you're a freelance writer or a journalist or someone like that who needs to find more gigs or wants to get more people to hire them. You should be talking about what it's like to be a writer on your site. Most sites will simply have a portfolio, an About Us, and a Contact Us page, and that's pretty much it. But you should have a section on there about what it's like to be a writer. You should be sharing the drafts that you rejected. You should be talking about the words that you left out. You should share one sentence that you've been working on for a few hours. Share all the different iterations of that sentence and talk about why you left this one out, why you changed this word, why you transposed these two words, what's different about the final version of the sentence compared to the initial version of the sentence. You need to share that process because people who read that and see it are going to go, this guy or this girl, they know their shit. They care enough about the words. They care enough about how the words sound. They care enough about sentence structure to actually share with me the process they went through to get there. And that means a whole lot more than someone simply sharing a series of essays that they've written or a series of articles that they've written. When you actually show people behind the scenes what it's like to actually have written these things, you get a whole lot more information. And again, you begin to build this audience. So one of the things that we've done, just to kind of bring this in perspective here and sort of add some context, during the introduction, you heard that we build web-based software and we keep our products simple and things like that. I want to talk about some of the things that we've done to get the word out. Over the past 5 years or so, we've had now currently over 2.5 million people sign up to use our products. And we don't have a PR firm. We don't spend money on advertising. We don't do any traditional marketing. All we've been doing is sharing. All we've been doing is teaching. So for example, in one of our products, a product called Basecamp, there's a feature called the yellow fade technique. Or actually, that's what it's called. But the feature is when you add a message or you add a to-do item, it flashes yellow for a second and then fades away. So you kind of notice what just happened. And it's a small little tiny thing, but we thought it was really effective. We thought it was really interesting. And so instead of keeping that idea to ourselves and just having it in our product, we decided to write about it and document it and talk about how we came up with the idea, why it's effective, and how we did it so you could do it too in your own product. And that single blog post has been read now over 800,000 times in the past 5 years. 800,000 different times people have opened that. You know, there may be a few people who have opened it more than once, but 800,000 times that blog post has been read, or viewed, I should say. And in that blog post, there's a lesson, which is how to do this feature. There's some thought behind the feature, and there's a mention of our product. So now all of a sudden we have 800,000 people who've seen this article, which has some educational value to it, but also has the name of our product in it and the name of our company in it. And that has traveled around the web. There's over 7,000 other blog posts now that reference that one article that took me 15 minutes to put together. You can't buy that kind of advertising. You simply cannot. Well, maybe you can if you have like hundreds of millions of dollars. But for the people who don't, which is all of us here probably, you can't buy that kind of advertising. We also did something where we wrote about how we do mock-ups. So when we design an interface for a product, we generally sketch it first. And I talked about how I actually sketch an interface. And this would normally be a really boring point that no one would care about. But surprisingly, people do care about it when you give them interesting details. For example, I talked about how I don't use ballpoint pens. I use thick markers when I sketch something. And I explain this because when you use ballpoint pen, the resolution is so fine that you can actually worry about details that don't matter right now. In the sketching phase, you shouldn't be worrying about that level of detail. So I use a big, thick marker. It prevents me from worrying about details. I can just worry about shapes and general placement of items on a screen. And that blog post, I put that out about a year and a half ago. It's been seen over 400,000 times now. And people have linked that up all over the place. If I was just writing a blog post about our products, they wouldn't have been, you know, some people would read them, but it would kind of die there because it's clearly an advertisement. It's clearly a marketing campaign. But if I talk about the techniques we used, the ideas we used, some of the things that we do to get our stuff done, that has a serious amount of travel and makes it out across the web in a variety of different places. And what you end up doing is you end up attracting like-minded people. You end up attracting potential customers. You may not even know they're customers, but they're going to be customers down the road. And again, they trust you more and they're paying attention to you more. They subscribe to your blog because you gave them something of value that wasn't a pure pitch. So my general suggestion is that whatever it is that you're doing, think about how you do it. Think about the domain. Think about the techniques that you use. And go back to your office today or tomorrow, whenever you get back to work. And instead of picking up where you left off, write something down about what you do. Share a process. Share something that makes sense to you. And educate the people who come to your site. And even if you don't have people coming to your site, start a blog today. And eventually, down the road, it may take a while, but you're going to start to build an audience. And when you start to build an audience, you have a captive audience who you can sell stuff to. And these people really intimately know what you have to say and what you're selling.